Welcome to the Only Dream Big podcast, starring your host, Donnie Bedney. Only Dream Big is a podcast where Donnie will share tips and experiences on different topics such as acquisition entrepreneurship, human capital, and the future of the workforce. He is the president of PSP Metrics and has been in the assessment and human capital management industry for more than 15 years, with the goal of driving change through people. As your guide on Dreaming Big, let's
podcast,
hear from the man himself.
I have today a special guest. Do I get the full government or
Just professional. Just go professional. And I got a special. So I'll take anything.
Kalifa Oliver. So excited to have you on. We've had some amazing conversations off camera. Obviously also share a number of things, including some beautiful and fun children. My daughter Sophia was actually just in the room, wanting to be on the pod today. And I promise to all the listeners that we will have her on for an episode. Today is not that day. But to quote Kalifa, we will not tempt fate. During this time, but just so excited to have you on the pod this week. Would love to start off just kind of with a little bit about your background. Know that you are, somewhat of a unicorn in the space that you work in, but that you also have just kind of an interesting journey and have had some amazing roles, frankly, with some really large organizations. I won't shout them out this morning unless you want to. But some Fortune 100s and otherwise, and they're just leading, people analytics and strategy and all those kind of things for global organizations. It's a pleasure to have you on.
I am happy to be here. So let me talk a little bit about my background. But the first thing I always try to get out of the way is that I have an accent that people hear that I don't hear. So I am originally from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. I came to the US in, I'm going to date myself, 2003, although I kind of already dated myself. In 2003, I went to a small HBCU in South Carolina, Benedict College, and then I got my master's and my PH.D. in IO psychology at Clemson University. And then I have certification in people analytics from MIT. And so I've worked in, to your point, several large companies, and I've also done consulting for several companies in the space of employee experience, people analytics, and of late, no surprise, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in really looking at assessments and taking empirical and research methods to make decisions, which is not typically what we think of when we think of HR, but It is my mission to make data more accessible and democratize it and less intimidating in the HR and people space.
Sure. Yeah, so shout out to HBCUs for just producing some amazing individuals. I also attended an HBCU. Shout out to Oakwood University. It was Oakwood College when I attended, but shout out to OU. And you said Benedict College?
Benedict College, yes.
Love it. HBCU is coming through. Obviously an amazing background. And in what you do from a people analytics perspective, talk to us a little bit about, your unique perspective that you're able to bring to these organizations. As you mentioned, we're kind of in a unique time, at least in the United States, where, we have this Black Swan event, really, catalyzed by global pandemic, but then a lot of social unrest. It seems like your role, could be extremely important at this time, just, in how data actually drives decision making. People talk about wanting to be inclusive. Right. What are you seeing? Like, what's the data telling us? Like, are things actually getting better? I know that there's been a lot of commitments and all of that, but what are you seeing from like a data perspective and also just personally / professionally?
So that's a lot.
I know we could go a lot of places.
A lot of things. So one, the reality is there's not a lot of people who look like me in my space. And it does give me the unique perspective of how to look at data in ways that people typically wouldn't look at data. And it took a while for me to get here, but I've become very comfortable being that person in the room who says, well, should we ask that question? So I've become that person because that person is needed. That seat at the table. I know we say all the time, or we're told all the time, if you don't have a seat at the table, build a table. That's true, but a lot of times the furniture, the tools and the equipment and the materials to build the table are still owned by the people who are sitting at that table. So you need to also find a way to also sit at that table, right? That's just the reality of where we are. Are things changing? I'm hopeful, right? The events of the past year and a half should have, in theory, taught a lot of lessons to both employees and employers. And I think there's still a pull and tug of we want to go back to our normal. But I think what the last year and a half has showed a lot of people is normal is very different for different people. And don't need to go back to normal. We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we definitely need to make changes where we're not pretending that people are just commodities that are not necessarily, important to organizations, because the truth is they are, right? Last year showed that, right? People are not just accounting commodities, right?
So what are some of those, just thinking practically, right? Like what are some of those lessons that, individuals, should have learned, quote unquote? And what are some of those lessons that organizations should have learned? Because I know we had a conversation, I want to say it was last week or so, but we had a conversation just in regards to the speed of change. Right. And that's something I've talked about a lot is and hence the whole black swan event. Right. And so remote working, which I like to refer to as a decentralized culture, is something that, people had sworn was coming for forever. And until, global pandemic, people cannot leave their homes. Then all of a sudden, organizations stood up literally overnight, thousands, if not millions of people working from home. And so we know that it can happen, and those people have been home. Some studies say that people have been, arguably just as productive, if not more productive. So what should organizations have learned during this time? And what are some of those things that you think, individuals should have learned as well?
So the first thing, let me start with what individuals should have learned, or what they did learn. The first thing they learned is they did not have to sit in traffic for 2 hours just to go to the office. They've learned that, right? Okay. Yep. I think right now there are a lot of organizations and articles and people who have a vested interest, namely people who own real estate and development companies, who are trying to gaslight people into believing that they missed the commute. People don't miss that commute, right? That is just the truth. No, there's nobody who missed the commute. They might miss some of the parts of it, like the ability to be out of the house and stop for coffee, but nobody wants to be in traffic for hours. Nobody wants one accident to set their whole day back, right? Nobody enjoyed being clocked in and clocked out by the office. So I think people realize that they can get stuff done. I think another lesson that came out of it is people are realizing the value of putting that stop between work and outside of work, right? When you were at the office, when you had that office routine, it was clear, right? It was a lot more clearer. But now that you're having that in the office, you start to understand it a lot more. Because you work more, right? And you don't think about it more. And we start to realize how much we don't think about how much we work, right?
Sure.
But now you're like, I'm at home and I have to consciously decide to cut work and be present at home. And I think it is good for people to finally understand it, because I also think what people are finding is what maybe their family and their friends were seeing and unable to talk about, unable to really be able to explain, like you're not present, right? And so they feel it now. So I think individuals have started learning their power as well, right?
Okay.
We've been fed for a long time that our organizations don't necessarily need us, that our organization, we're replaceable, we're expensive, we're a cost. But the minute, the minute things went crazy, organizations quickly realized, I guess we do need people. We cannot automate everything. We have to give people resources to do the things. And turns out people will be productive even if you're not staring at them. And so I think that's the lesson that individuals learn their power. Now, that of course leads me to what organizations should have learned. Organizations need to learn that control is not the same as giving people that room to be productive. Control does not equal productivity. Control doesn't equal performance. You seeing me in the office doesn't mean I'm working. It doesn't mean I'm working, right? And the pretense that we have to be in one space to be productive and innovative, they should have learned that is absolutely not true. Because when they look at when they had to sit down and look at their locations and their location strategy and all that good stuff, they should have realized that half of their people are already working remotely if they are a large multinational or a large decentralized company. There are people who are driving to work, to the office, to spend the entire day on the phone and in video calls anyway, because you're located all over the place. So they should have looked at that in their location strategy. The other thing that they should have learned, and this is, I think, one of the harder lessons, is that because they had to change their processes and their policies, they became more inclusive. And they didn't realize that. So a lot of those accommodations that they didn't think that they could do, it turns out they can do it. So now you open the door for people with disabilities. Now you flattened your job market and your landscape for skills. So now somebody who's working remotely, who typically you wouldn't look at, somebody who's in a rural area, somebody who's not normally accessible to your company, suddenly you can get skills from anywhere. You can discover all of these people, all of the places that typically you could not have accepted because you were so determined for them to be in one area. And then the other thing that I'm hoping is learned, and this one is one that I find the data showing me a lot of organizations haven't yet learned, is that culture does not mean one place. That's not what builds a culture. Your culture comes from your people, and your culture comes from the bottom up. So if you create a culture, you give them technology, you reinforce, you communicate, you lead, right? You will get that culture. Don't pretend that we don't have whole cultures of gamers and stuff who've never met each other, not one time. And it's a very, very clear culture. And this is I think that one is harder for them to grasp because we've been told that culture means that you all have to be in one space all the time. But
we've seen the same thing in things like church, right? I mean, the amount of people who, swear that like church is a building, now have a lot of folks have been forced virtually, right?
Right. And I'm like, didn't they tell you Jesus is wherever y'all are? What is this? What is this? Stop!
There we go.
It's this need for control. It's a need for control that we've built, and there's a peacocking that I think people miss. They miss the ability to peacock and show out, and there's something about being virtual that it's a great equalizer in a sense, because if it doesn't matter what level you are, and you are my box is the same size as your box, is the same size as your box. And if I don't want you to mind my business, I can blur my background. I can change my background. And it equalizes it because it doesn't give people the power to kind of dominate a room, which I think is a fantastic thing that has happened over the past year and a half.
Wow. Well, you said a few things. That one that I want to go back to on the individual side. You talked about people realizing that it's important to kind of have a separation between work and your home life. And I've said this for a while, but I think the great poet Michael Jackson said it best as he was